Good evening. Tonight you're going to learn how to add and subtract unlike algebraic fractions. This is very similar to adding and subtracting unlike fractions without any variables. So let's get right to it. We have reviewed in class how to do this without variables. The steps are the same. Okay, so first step, when you are adding and subtracting fractions, you look to see if they have a common denominator. Well, this one does not have a common denominator, so you need to find the LCD. Okay, well we did this yesterday. Well, the LCD between 3 and 5 is 15. And then you look at your variables. The y, the biggest exponent for y is y squared. So your LCD is y squared. So that's what you're trying to get to. So now you have to ask yourself, well, what times 3y squared gives me 15y squared? And what times 5y gives me 15y squared? Well, let's set this up so you can follow along exactly what we're doing. And since this is a subtraction, I'm going to attach this with a negative x, just so we can keep track of that subtraction sign. Now I have to ask myself, what do I have to multiply by to get to my 15y squared on the bottom? Usually when we just have numbers, it's really easy just to kind of do this in our head. Okay? So I'm asking, remember we're multiplying. When we add and subtract fractions, we can multiply by a factor of 1. So the same on the top and the same on the bottom. So you ask yourself, okay, well 3 times what will give me 15? Well, 3 times 5. And then y squared times what will give me y squared? Well, times 1, so I don't have to put anything, so I'm done with the top. So I get 15x, because 3x times 5 is 15x. Now, I have 5y down here to worry about. So 5 times what gives me 15? 5 times 3. And then y times what will give me y squared? Well, that is y times y. So then I also have to multiply that on the top. So then negative x times 3y is just negative 3xy. And then now I can just simply combine those. Now that I have my common denominator, I know my common denominator is going to stay the same. And then now I have 15x minus 3xy. Well, they're not like terms, so I can't do anything. So I have 15x minus 3xy. And for our purposes now, we're going to be satisfied with that answer. But I encourage those of you who want to see how you can simplify that further to go ahead and do that and then share your answers in class tomorrow. Okay, moving on to number 2. Once again, we look and say, hey, I don't have a like denominator, so first thing we need to do is find our like denominator. So I look at 4 and 3 and I say, okay, well, that is 12. And then once again, I look for my biggest exponent for each variable, and I get x squared. So now I'm going to do the same thing we did for the first one. We're going to rewrite those two fractions, and I'm going to write a plus 3 here just so I keep track of that plus sign over 3x squared. So now we're going to ask ourselves, okay, well, what do we have to multiply by? So we're going to set up our two fractions here. Equals, I'm trying to get to 12x squared on both the top and the bottom, or on both bottoms. And we go through that same process. Well, 3 times what gives me 12? 3 times 4. And I have enough x's to match that, so I don't have to do anything else. So it's just 3 times 4, which is 12. And then I go to the top and I say, okay, well, 4 times what will give me 12? Well, 4 times 3. And then x times what will give me x squared? Well, I need to multiply that by an x. So same thing on top. So when I multiply 5 times 3x, I get 15x. Okay? And this is still a positive 12 over here. So now when I notice I have my like denominator, so my denominator is the same. I combine the top, so I get 15x, and then plus 12 because I'm adding. Once again, for our purposes today, we're going to be happy with that answer, but I urge you to see how you can simplify that a little bit more. Okay, let's move on to example 3. Once again, I'm subtracting, so I need a like denominator, and I do not have one. So we need to find that first. So if it's 6 and 10, my LCD, you might think it's 60, but it's actually 30. And then I look to my variable. The biggest W I need is W squared. So now I know I need to get to 30W squared for my denominator. So going to write each fraction again. And then once again, that's a negative, so a subtraction. So I'm going to put that negative with the 2v now. It's just rewriting it. Same thing. Okay, now we're going to go through that process of what do I have to multiply by to get to 30w squared on the bottom. Okay, so I have 10 times what gives me 30. 10 times 3. W times what gives me w squared? 3w. So I also have to multiply that on the top. And negative 2v times 3w gives you negative 6v w, or wv, either way. And then on the top, 6 times what gives me 30? 6 times 5. And then w squared times what gives me w squared? I don't have to do anything else there. So I get 6v times 5 is 30v. Now going back, I have the same denominator, so I can combine my numerators now. And I have 30v minus 6vw. And it's minus because my original problem was a subtraction sign. So I have 30v minus 6vw all over 30w squared. Once again, that can be simplified a little bit further, but for our purposes, we are done at that point. Okay, for our final example, we have a few more variables that we need to worry about for this one. So once again, I'm subtracting, so I'm just going to right away change that to plus and minus 3, just so I know that's a negative 3. And I need to find my LCD. Okay, so looking at 4 and 6, your LCD between those two numbers is 12. And then you have to look at each variable and take the biggest variable. So I have x and x squared. Well, x squared is certainly bigger, so I'm going to take x squared. And then I have y to the third and y. I'm going to take y to the third because that's bigger than just plain old y. And then z and nothing, well, one z is more than no z's, so I need to also include a z in my LCD. So now we go through that same process. I'm going to rewrite our fraction, so 5 over 4x y to the third z, and a negative 3 over 6x squared y. And then we go through that same process. What do I have to multiply to get to my LCD? So times something gives me 12x squared y to the third z, and the same on this one as well. Okay, so let's begin. Say 6 times what gives me 12? Well, 6 times 2. X squared times, well, just 1 gives me x squared, so I don't have to worry about that. Y times what gives me y to the third? Well, I need 2 more y's. And then I have no z's, but I need a z, so I need to multiply by z as well. So then I also have to do the same to the top. So then I get negative 3 times 2 is negative 6, and then my variables just follow, y squared z. And then let's look at the top one. 4 times what gives me 12? Well, 4 times 3. X times what gives me x squared? Well, I need an x there. Y to the third times what gives me y to the third? I don't need any more. And z times what gives me z? I don't need any more. So then I'm done. I multiply by 3x. So my top is 5 times 3x is just 15x. Now, all I have to do is notice that my denominators are the same. So I can begin to combine my numerators. There's my denominator, 12x squared y to the third over z. And then my numerator is just simply 15x. minus 6y squared z. And for our purposes, that is simplified, but it can be simplified further if you have figured out a way to do so. Okay, what I would like you to do at this point is try number 5 on your own. You may not have enough room to do it in your paper, so if you don't, flip it over and do it on the back. But good luck, and be prepared to share your answers when you get to class. And if you have any questions, make sure you ask a question on the bottom, or maybe make up a question for one of your classmates. All right, good luck and have a good night.